Rising Sun is a visually stunning dudes on a map area control game set in a mythical version of ancient feudal Japan. You'll manage your clan's forces, recruit powerful monsters, pray for help from the gods, form alliances, and occasionally commit ritual suicide. Do we need some sort of trigger warning here? Yes, the game does actually involve the concept of honourable suicide, and you're rewarded points for doing so. I'm James Bruce, you're watching Tabletop Dungeon. Let's find out if Rising Sun is right for you. Rising Sun by manufacturer Simon is designed for 3 to 5 players and plays best at 5. But you better make sure they're really good friends, because after playing this they may start to become your mortal enemies. As a quick disclaimer, what you see here has some game upgrades in the form of plastic components and a larger playmat. Otherwise, I have separated out all the extra clans and the monsters and such, so all the miniatures here are present in the retail game. The core box has cardboard tokens for everything except the miniatures, and it has a smaller standard board, while the Kickstarter replaced these, for instance, with actual castles. Rising Sun was released in 2018, but I'm reviewing it now because it remains one of my top 5 favourite games of all time. It has a complexity rating of 3.3 on Board Game Geek, but that complexity increases significantly the more parts you add in. It's easy to scale up. And as it is, I have a ton of extra Kickstarter bits, monsters, some extra clans, which you may no longer be able to find. But for reference, my 8-year-old is quite capable of playing this, as is my 80-year-old mother, though he's used to fairly complex games at this point. And obviously you should use your own judgment when it comes to your children and whether they are mature enough to play this, especially with reference to things like ritual suicide. Alright, let's briefly talk about how to play Rising Sun before we get onto my opinions. To begin, each player selects a clan: Koi, Dragonfly, Lotus, Bonsai, or Turtle Clan, each of which has its unique power and is given a set of unique miniatures that represent their forces. This consists of your Daimyo, the big boss man who is immune to pretty much everything except death, 6 Bushi, who are your basic warriors, 3 Shinto, who are your warrior priests. These guys can be assigned either to fight on the map or worship in the shrines to gain the favour of the kami, or the gods. As a quick aside, much of the game draws influence and language from Japan, though much of it has also been butchered. For instance, Oni is the correct Japanese word for monster, while Shinto is a religion, not a warrior priest. Some of the monsters are just taken from folklore, while others are just completely made up and nonsense. The flow of time and seasonality is also important in Rising Sun. The game is played out over 3 seasons starting in spring, with winter being the game end, the time to take stock and see who is the ultimate ruler. Each season then consists of 7 rounds and ends in a war phase. Each round, players will take it in turns to select a mandate from their choice of 4. There are 5 possible mandates, and that applies for everyone. So you choose a mandate for that round, and then everyone takes that action. So, Marshal. That means that all players can move all their units 1 space, or whatever their unique rules are. In addition, the player who selected Marshal and their ally, if they have one, may opt to pay to build a stronghold, a castle, from which troops can be enlisted later. The second mandate is Enlist. Each player can bring onto the board miniatures from reserve at each of their strongholds, with the player who chose the mandate and their ally getting 1 additional miniature. These can either be placed directly on the map to increase your force, or placed into your shrines if they are Shinto, the relevance of which will be apparent later. Train allows all players to purchase one of that season's upgrade cards. These can vary each game, but essentially they consist of some powerful monsters, or some upgrades that get you points or money when certain actions are taken. This is where most of the game's complexity comes from, as you try to remember all of the cards you have and how they interact with what you or your opponent is doing and how that will affect your plans. Next up is Harvest, where all players gain 1 coin. Not a lot. But the player who chose this mandate, as well as their ally, will also harvest the benefits from any area where they currently have the greater force. Each area gives different benefits, such as 3 coins down here in Kyushu, or Kyoto being 2 points and 2 coins. As a quick aside, if the amount of force is tied between 2 players, the most honourable player will always win, for which you'll refer to the honour track here. And this applies to any sort of ties in the game. Honour is tracked and may change during the game, depending on your actions, but if there is ever a case where something is tied, the most honourable player will win. Lastly, betray, and this is the only mandate which only the player choosing the mandate benefits from. If they're in an alliance, they immediately break the alliance and lose honour. But their main action for choosing that is that they can swap any 2 miniatures on the board for their own. Now, these don't have to be specifically from your ally, in fact it has to be from 2 different players. Just any 2 miniatures on the board, and the miniatures must be of the same type. So a Shinto can be changed for one of your own Shinto, a Bushi for a Bushi, or a monster for a monster. Daimyo, however, are immune from this effect, as well as most game effects outside of, well, being killed. Then after rounds 3, 5 and 7, you have a special Kami round, in which you determine who benefits from the god's favours. From left to right, you'll examine who has the most Shinto worshippers, remembering that honour breaks ties, and whoever wins that gets that particular benefit. These can be as simple as 2 coins or 2 free moves, immediately become the highest honour, or more complex, like 1 point per castle. Although again, these vary each game, as does the order. So there's 7 in total to choose from. Each game there'll be 4, and they can be randomised. Shinto worshipping here are stuck there until the next season, and they can't be used on the board to fight. Lastly, after those 7 mandates and Kami rounds, we enter the war phase. Each season, provinces where war occurs are randomly assigned, and then battles are fought only there. Depending on the number of players, there will be more or less battles. Winning control of the war zones is the main way in which to score points in Rising Sun, and it will make all the difference at the end of the game. Provinces that are won in spring are worth 1 point each, 2 in summer, and 3 in winter, so the battles get more serious as the game goes on. Meanwhile, there are also bonus points for the number of different provinces that you've won, and in my experience, that's what the winner hinges on at the end of the game. So actually fighting a battle is a whole other thing that we should talk about. Anyone with at least 1 force in that province takes part. So actually fighting a battle is a whole other thing that we need to talk about. Anyone with at least 1 force will take part in the fight. Flip your turn hint card over and you'll find there are 5 phases to battle. Show your opponents how much money and Ronin tokens you have, Ronin being samurai for hire. Then in secret you will bid on each of the 5 different stages of war. Once decided, reveal and see who wins the right to perform each action before determining the outcome. The first action is to bow out of the battle honourably, and thematically that means killing your own miniatures, all of them. You'll get 1 point and 1 increase in honour rank for every single miniature that dies this way, but keep them close to the battle, laying on their side, because it might matter in a moment. If this step means there's only 1 player left in the battle, then they win that province, so you can skip to the battle resolution and the last step of Imperial Poets. But if not, if there's still people left in the battle, or no one decided to kill themselves, move on to step 2, taking hostage. Whoever has bid the highest on this step may immediately take one of their opponent's miniatures hostage, and this includes monsters that aren't immune for whatever reason, so this can be a really powerful step that can turn the tide of battle. In addition to removing 1 miniature, you steal a victory point from that player. At the end of all the battles, you do have to return it, but it won't go back on the board, it'll just go back to the player to be summoned later. The next step is the ability to bring in your Ronin. These are the temporary samurai for hire that only fight in 1 battle, and they can be obtained through various methods throughout the season. But again, you must win the bidding war of this step in order to have the right. Only the winner is allowed to add Ronin to their force in this way. But equally, you can bid on the step and not add anything, just to prevent your opponent from doing so. Finally, at this point, you determine who won the battle. Just count up the force. Again, ties determined by honour. The winner takes the war token and the loser dies. All of them. Lay them down for the last step, which is Imperial Poets. So whoever won this step will get points for every miniature that died during the battle, both because of the final result or because of the first step of honourably killing themselves. So the player who gets the Imperial Poet's points isn't necessarily the player who won the province. It can be anyone who took part in the battle but happened to bid highest on this step. You're getting the points because even if you didn't win that particular fight, you wrote the history books and, I don't know, sold the movie rights. Of course, any money spent during battle is taken away, and if you have any more battles to fight, you better hope you didn't spend your entire savings. Okay, so game overview out the way. What do I love about Rising Sun? First and foremost, the game is visually stunning. The miniatures are intricately designed, they're all unique. The artwork on the game board and cards is absolutely breathtaking. You'll feel like you're stepping into feudal Japan with every play. It is an epic experience, especially if you have some additional components offered in the Daimyo box of the Kickstarter. But I think the base game alone offers a lot, and that's what you can see here on the board. Secondly, the game is incredibly strategic. There are so many different ways to approach each battle and each bidding round, and every decision you make has serious consequences for the rest of the game. You'll need to carefully consider your actions and stay one step ahead of your opponent if you want to emerge victorious. There is no dice rolling. There's a very small amount of luck in that when you choose the mandates, they're shuffled each season, and you only get to choose from the top 4. So if you're unlucky, you might end up with a really bad selection to choose from, like 2 betray mandates and 2 movement martial mandates, but generally that's going to be a very small part of the overall strategy. One aspect that really sets Rising Sun apart is the diplomacy. You'll want to form alliances because alliances offer real value in the form of shared bonuses from chosen mandates, but you should also be prepared to backstab them if the time is right. Another great feature of Rising Sun is the replayability. With different clans to choose from, multiple strategies to explore, a random selection of kami, and the ability to swap out some of the season cards. No 2 games are ever going to be the same. Lastly, it's a game that combines a lot of engaging mechanics. You've got the area control aspect of moving your forces strategically around the map. You need to combine that with the asynchronous upgrades and unique monster and clan abilities. And then you've got the whole bluffing and social deduction elements of the war phase. It's a combination of strategic interactions that really appeals to me. My wife, on the other hand, can't stand it. But I'll let you in on a little secret. Every year on my birthday, I've made it a tradition to play Rising Sun. An epic game with all of the upgrades and extras thrown in. The game typically lasts an entire afternoon. It's a Twilight Imperium level experience for me, and I really love it. It's not perfect though. What could be better or might not work for you? The game can be quite complex and intimidating for new players, even though it's only got a complexity rating of 3.3. There are a lot of rules to learn, and the strategic depth of the game can be overwhelming at first. While the complexity is a big part of what makes the game so engaging for me, it can also be a barrier for those who are new to strategy board games. Although again, the more parts and components that you throw in, the more complex it's going to be. The base game alone is not overly complex. Another potential downside is the game's reliance on diplomacy and negotiation. While this can be a fun and exciting aspect of the game, it can also be a turn-off for some players who prefer more straightforward, cutthroat gameplay. If you're not a fan of having to form social alliances and negotiate with your opponents because you're socially awkward, I completely understand, and Rising Sun might not be the game for you. Speaking of which, the game is at its best with a full complement of 5 players. While it is possible to play with fewer players, and we typically play with 4, the game really shines with a full table of 5. This means that if you don't have a regular group of board game buddies to play with, you might not get the full experience out of Rising Sun. But again, that social aspect of the strategy means that in a 5-player game, 1 player will always be without an alliance because you can't make 3-person alliances. If you've got plenty of betrayals going on, this isn't usually a problem. Things will ebb and flow, other alliances will be formed, but sometimes people just play nice and stick with the same alliances throughout the game, especially in a 4-player game. And it sort of becomes a team game, possibly with 1 person on their own team. So you do need everyone to have an understanding that alliances are made to be broken, and everyone must play to win, not quarterback their team if they feel like they're losing. This can be difficult for some group dynamics, such as couples. As I mentioned, there's some heavy use of Japanese words in the game, not actual Japanese text. The names of provinces, monsters, etc. Personally, having lived in Japan for 7 years, pronunciation isn't an issue for me. I like that aspect of the game. It is one of the big things that draws me to it, but there may be communications issues, often hilariously because someone is telling you their plans and they've completely butchered the name of the province so much that you have literally no idea what they're talking about. Lastly, setup time can be upwards of 20 minutes. There's a bunch of minis to get out and distribute, decks of cards to sort, randomized start conditions to deal. It really helps if people can decide their clans in advance, so if you have friends coming round, that basically means you can set everything up and get them spaced out on the table properly, because there's also a seating order which matters. So, while Rising Sun is an amazing game in many respects, an epic experience, it can be quite divisive and it really might not be for everyone. Its complexity, reliance on diplomacy and player interaction can all be potential downsides with the wrong group. But if you're looking for a game that will transport you to feudal Japan and test your strategic mettle, then Rising Sun is the game for you. Just be prepared to negotiate, backstab, and thoroughly fight your way to victory. And also see if you can find that Kickstarter extras box too. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this review and that it's helped you decide whether or not Rising Sun is the game for you. Please hit like, consider subscribing, keep rolling those dice, and remember, the real victory is in having fun with your friends or utterly crushing them with your superior strategy. Until next time, you've been watching Tabletop Dungeon.